Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Current. We're glad that you have listened in today. We are doing this fun series, kind of this summer, like a summer reading list. And we're talking about some books that have been really just influential to us, and kind of telling you about them and encouraging you to maybe pick up a copy and read it yourself. Today is, I love this book.
So good.
Such a good book. And it's by an author named Jonathan Martin.
Yes.
Before we get into the title of the book, what the book's about, I thought it'd be good to maybe talk about him.
Yeah.
Because he's got a great story.
He really does.
Really great story. You want to talk about him for just a minute?
Yeah. Jonathan Martin's he's an interesting character, and I think part of what makes this guy so interesting is just his background being unique. He kind of has a blend of two worlds. So he grew up in a really Pentecostal tradition. Yeah. So deeply Pentecostal roots. And I know for both of us, that's like not a part of our world at all. Yep. Spent very little time around that. But it's something he was raised in and was kind of a multiple generation sort of preacher in that Pentecostal tradition. And begins to teach himself at a young age. He has a bunch of people around him affirming these gifts, and he sort of rises to prominence, gets a larger following, and has a fairly successful ministry as a Pentecostal pastor. Some crazy things end up happening in his life. He has some turbulence, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But part of his story is he ends up over at Duke Divinity School. This is in Durham, North Carolina, and they're a Methodist school. Is kind of their traditional roots, but really great, rigorous academic stuff. It's a fantastic divinity school. And so he sort of comes in with this low church, Pentecostal, high spirit, charismatic vibe, and is in this world which is very much not that, very academic, a little bit more dry, but he's introduced to some really rich, great theology, also to just some exposure to the great Christian tradition, and gets to understand, hey, what does Christianity look like in the past? And so Jonathan Martin, through all these experiences, comes out as someone I love to read because he has this great blend of theology and spirit, orthodoxy and sort of orthopraxy. How does this work out in our lives? And I love a guy who doesn't write just as a theologian, doesn't just write as a spiritual director or even just as a pastor, but he kind of blends all these three things in together. And so I haven't read a ton of his books, but whenever I do, I can't decide if I'm being pastored, if I'm learning theology, if my spirit's being stoked within me. I get a little bit of all of it. So just a real interesting guy, great background, and also just a solid writer too. Yeah,
I think so. And I think the way I found him was actually through Twitter. Like, I love his Twitter feed. He's just like, again, his like ability to communicate.
Yes.
Just really good. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like it kind of jives with where we're at as a church. I think you've said this before. I think I've told people this. Like, we're probably label ourselves as like Wesleyan, charismatic Anabaptist.
Yeah.
So like, it's kind of like, we kind of jive with that. Although we'd have different ways we arrived there. Like, our stories are very different than his. But I think, we are very similar, maybe kind of where we've landed.
Yes,
And so, I think we're just kind of kindred spirits, I guess you could say. But anyway, I love the way he writes. I love this book we're going to be talking about today. I think he's written several books, but the one we're going to be talking about today is How to Survive a Shipwreck. And the subtitle is Help is on the Way and Love is Already Here. And so we've each got a copy here, but this is what it looks like. If you want to pick this up, I'd encourage you to do so. And so I think a great place to start would be just maybe explaining what the kind of the premise of the book is. I can kind of explain what give
a little summary.
Kind of where I feel like main themes are. And if you want to, add on, feel free. But, he's really just talking about, when life, I think we all kind of experience life as just seasons of trouble. There's seasons of like a shipwreck. And how do we survive it? How do we navigate those difficult times? And what does it look like? And I think one of the most beautiful things about this book is over and over again, Jesus comes up as kind of the look at Jesus's life, and really there's this main idea throughout Jesus's life and ministry, this idea of, hey, if you want to find your life, you really need to lose it. And so what does that really mean? And I think he does a great job in this book talking about, when Jesus says to find your life, you must lose it, you really do lose your life. And honestly, it's through like humiliation is one of his main ideas. Like this idea, it's actually in humiliation is when we find salvation. Look at Jesus. He was humiliated. It's what brought forth salvation. And so as Christians, we kind of step into that life. So, surviving a shipwreck is understanding like, hey, even in these darkest, most painful moments, and I love this. So the beginning of the book, he equates it to like a sea. The whole thing's kind of like this idea of water and a shipwreck. But he says at the very bottom, like you got to do the work of like entering into the depths of your brokenness. But at the very bottom of it, the very bottom of the sea is love. And like that is where I feel like there's so much beauty in that. And I think there's so much comfort in that. And actually, I'm read this book recently with a guy in our church who's, I would say, in a shipwreck. And it's just been so cool to see how encouraged he's been by this book because it just offers hope. It offers so much hope in the midst of the brokenness. And he doesn't, I feel like what I appreciate about the book, just again, this kind of overarching kind of idea is that it doesn't, I feel like Christians a lot of times, or Christian writers, can approach the subject and just trust God, just have faith, just keep praying. It's very different. And honestly, he uses a lot of his life stories, his life examples about, times in his life in which this is what he experienced. Yeah. And there's other things too. He talks about, the necessary of having friends, community to help walk you through it and things like that. But any other big themes or ideas you?
I just love, like you said, it's a great book in the sense that I think this book touches everybody. It's not one of those where, I don't know, this doesn't really fit my interest.
Sure.
No, we're all kind of riding the sea of life, and we all are going to have these times where we find ourselves in a shipwreck, and whether that means we've gone through divorce, or, hey, I have a loved one that died, or my job just collapsed, or I'm losing my faith. I mean, there's so many different types of shipwrecks we can find ourselves in. Sure. And yet, this book applies to, I think, all of them. And I want to touch on what you said. I love this idea of like, hey, it's actually through humiliation, it's actually through suffering that we find hope and healing. And I love he ties early on in the book this idea of baptism and talks about it as being like our death, right? This is what baptism is symbolizing, is that we are united with Christ in death and sort of rising with him. And sort of the Christian theme is like, hey, to get to life, first you got to pass through death. Like there is no resurrection first without cross and death. And kind of using this and helping us see, hey, this is perfectly fitting within the Christian story. If we follow a guy who had to suffer, humiliate, die, and then on the other side find a resurrection, then we shouldn't lose hope in the midst of shipwreck, but we should rather see it as an opportunity for God to do what he does, and that is take dead things and bring them back up. So good. One of the things that I love about this book, and you touched on it a bit at the end there, was that, yes, it's kind of talking about these rich theological themes about Jesus and who he is and how we understand our suffering story in light of his. And at the same time, he gets very practical. He gives advice for, hey, here's how we navigate it. And like I said, we're listening to a theologian. Sometimes I feel like I'm listening to a pastor, and sometimes a poet. He's got it all. But I think one of my favorite chapters is chapter 4. I don't want to spoil too much because I want you guys to read this book because it's that good. But chapter 4 is called Eating, Breathing, Sleeping. And I love this because in this chapter, he literally just covers these 3 things and says, hey, in the midst of shipwreck, in the midst of this, here's 3 things we need to do to care for ourselves. He says you need to eat, find time to do this. Breathe, talking about the practice of breathing. Also unites this to God's breath, what that means. When he talks about eating, he unites it to the Eucharist and stuff, but also just talks about, hey, go eat an apple in the morning. This will be good for you. And also sleeping, just the importance of, I think he says, sometimes the most spiritual thing we can do in the midst of shipwreck is take a nap. I'm like, oh my goodness, I love that, rest, just sleep, trust that God's there and that he'll be there when you wake up. And so, I just love in this book the mixture of practicality, which is deep biblical reflection, really good theology. And I just know I've been bettered from this book. It's one of those books that I don't want to just be like, oh, hey, this is cool. But really ministered to me in a time of shipwreck and just turbulence. And I found myself on the other end of it saying, okay, yeah, that's right. I can be at the bottom of the sea, and maybe love's already here for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on. Just the rich, like if you're looking for something like deeply like theological, I feel like there's enough there to keep you kind of hanging on. But then also the practicality of it too is right there. And I think like it's commendable of him to be able, I mean, he has a gift, I would say.
Oh, absolutely.
Able to do that. And I would also say, I also appreciate when an author is vulnerable. And so he shares a lot of his story. We mentioned like he kind of went through a shipwreck. And so not only that, but like there's also just hilarious stories of, you know, like him getting his car stuck
in
like,
the alley.
you know, like stuff like that. It's just like there's personal stories too. And so you feel like you kind of have a connection. He's walked it, he's lived it, you know, and it's much easier to really trust somebody that, you know, is vulnerable enough to share their own story. And I've loved, you know, reading the book.
Yeah, I think that's so good that it's not just like, hey, here's some ideas that I've kind of extrapolated from the Bible, try this out, but rather it's like, no, I've lived this in the test field of my life or the lab of my life and seen, and we get to get a peek firsthand at how these things played out, and really some of the times how he had to discover these truths in these chapters for himself. And so I think it's good for us. We can lean in and say, all right, Jonathan, you've done the hard work of having to navigate those roads, and maybe we can harvest some of the fruit from that experience you've had, so that way when we're in the midst of our shipwreck, we don't have to do the same thing. We can learn from you.
Yeah, and I think too, like, this book is so really is countercultural. And I know like that's cliche to say. I know that, you know, it's easy to say about a lot of things in the Christian world, but I really mean that, because I mean, he spends a lot of time even talking about like ego and what our ego does and how we're so trying to be so set apart from other people, like our sports interest teams, or like, you know, we claim all of these things like that, we try to differentiate ourselves. But he says in reality, like, we're all very similar, you know, and I just love that, like, you know, everything in our ego is kind of like protecting, just like really avoiding a shipwreck, you know, like we're trying so hard, but in the reality, like, you know, taking up your cross daily that's the walk of the Christian life. And it's really putting your ego down and allowing, you know, your ego to lay at the feet of Jesus. And, you know, I'm broken. I'm just like anyone else. And there's some cool things in there too, like just kind of more personal for me. You know, there's a story about this. It's actually Barbara Brown Taylor. I think. Yeah, she did. He quotes her, and she talks about how, you know, for me as a pastor, you can oftentimes feel disconnected, or like, you know, you're outside of what's really true of people's lives, and like you're kind of protected and. You know, but she shares a story where she's at a pool party with all of like her church congregation, and all of a sudden there's this like kind of riot ensues at the pool, where everybody's throwing everyone else in the pool, like clothed or not, like, you know, like everyone's just kind of ganging up and throwing everyone else in the pool. And she talks about how these couple people like look at her and then pass her by because she's the pastor, you know. But then she said before she knew it, someone came up behind her, like grabbed her arms, and she was thrown right in the pool. And she said it was the most beautiful moment, because like she needed that to know, like, hey, I'm in here in the water with these people, and I'm just like they are. And there's so much symbolism there. Again, I want to ruin that. That's it's just a quote in there. So, but anyway, like this whole section of the book is just so good, because she talks about how like there's no better feeling knowing that I'm in the water with these people, the same kind of cleansing water, the same like life-giving water as a pastor, as the people that I'm walking with. And so anyway, there's just such really rich stories like that. And there's just like a lot of symbolism, a lot of, you know, it's easy to grasp. There's a lot of storytelling. I love that. In books too. And
he's a great storyteller. Yeah. He's kind of got it all. And I think really the biggest plug I can give for this book is like, hey, no matter what your situation is or what type of shipwreck, or if you faced a shipwreck, like you need to read this book. It's one where, if you're in the midst of one, you're going to benefit. But like we said, it's coming regardless. And I think you'd be naive to say, nah, man, these waters are going to be fine and smooth sailing. And I think I heard as a young Christian too, like, oh, be ready. You know, it's not always great. It's not always zealous. You're going to hit rough patches and these sort of things. But no, that really does happen. And it's good for us to say, hey, yeah, how can I prepare myself for those spaces? But then also I want to say, whether you're someone who's like, man, I'm wrestling with these spiritual crises, well, man, this book can help you in that too. But you might say, no, actually, yeah, it's just work sucks and I feel like I'm drowning. Well, this is applicable there too. And I just feel, while maybe not every single piece of the book will speak to you, there is a piece of this book that will speak to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what we kind of deal with in ministry, I think, the most, is like that question of like suffering, good and evil. Like, why does God allow this to happen? That's just like the age-old question. It's kind of what everybody kind of struggles with. And this really gets at the heart of, God's purpose in the pain, like what he's really doing, what he's working for. We always say like he doesn't cause it, but he can use it for good, and he always does. He always uses what life throws our way for our good. And somehow, some way, it's just kind of the God he is. But it's a beautiful book, and again, this is going to be a little bit shorter episode. We can't spend a ton of time on the book because we want you to read it.
Exactly.
So, but that's hopefully you get the general idea. And I would just say too, and if you're looking for, maybe somebody to journey along with you, we would love to do that. And, as pastors, I feel like, again, this is in the book too, but just talking about how you need other people to survive a shipwreck. You can't do it by yourself. And so if you're in some of the deepest, maybe darkest moments of your life right now, and you'd say, that is me, like there's no way I can survive this by myself, reach out to one of us. You can find us on contact info on our website, or reach out via YouTube, or however you're listening. Feel free to look us up, and we'd love to walk with you in this season, and whether that's meet with you face to face or a phone call or email, whatever that looks like. I know we would love to walk with you. We've been there, and I think that's what we appreciate so much about the book is obviously a guy that's very similar to us, but in a lot of ways we're all in the same boat. We're all in the swimming pool, trying to survive, so reach out if you feel like you need somebody to walk alongside you.
Yeah, I'd say 2020, maybe a little 2021 has been a shipwreck year if I've ever heard of one, and hope that know that help's on the way and love's already there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's a beautiful book. I encourage you to pick it up. Again, you can find it on Amazon or really anywhere books are sold. Get yourself a copy, and if you don't want to buy one, we'll mail you one. Shoot us your address. We'll send it to you. That's how much we believe in it, I think. I'll do that. I'll buy it, whatever. But
it's a great book.
Yeah, it's an awesome book. So, all right, add it to your summer reading list. And are we going to do any more of these?
Yeah, we got one more here, July to go. Right. So finish this one up. You got a month. Come back next month. We're going to have another great one for you.
Yep. All right, so one more book after this. But, pick these up. Hopefully you read them. I think it really will change your life. So thanks for joining with us. Another episode of The Current. We'll be back here next Friday. Hope you have a great week. Grace and peace.